A broken beacon turns slowly among old wreckage, singing a warning no one was meant to hear. A lone cargo ship answers it, and a line of civilian vessels appears out of the dark behind it. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoy the story, a like or comment means a lot. Let's begin. The first thing Dalton Kade noticed was that the dead beacon had started singing. It was a thin, broken tone through Wayward's cockpit speakers, rising and falling like it had forgotten what alarm it was supposed to be. Dalton looked past the cracked forward glass at the black field ahead. A mile-wide freighter hull turned slowly in the distance. Closer in, loose cargo pods drifted like seeds in dark water. The beacon floated between them, one bent antenna pointed directly at him. That, Dalton said to no one, is either a warning or a very bad attempt at music. Wayward's console gave him 3 different answers at once. The navigation map said the route was clear. The collision system said there was a spinning engine bell moving across his path. The old civilian scanner, which he trusted more than either of the other two, showed a faint heat trail coming from behind the beacon. He reached for the manual controls. Wayward was a cargo hauler repaired by 6 different owners and forgiven by none of them. The left thruster ran hot, and the cargo lift complained whenever the temperature dropped. But the ship listened to him. Dalton rolled Wayward on its side and sent it through the narrow gap between a tumbling cargo pod and the dead freighter hull. A chunk of metal the size of a transport shuttle passed under his keel so closely that the warning lights went red. "See," he told the cockpit. "Clear route." The heat trail resolved into a small shuttle, engine sputtering, too far off course and moving too fast. A human voice came through the emergency band in a rush of static. "Unidentified hauler, brake right. Brake right now." Dalton glanced at the line of wreckage ahead. "I was planning to, then planned faster." A dark shape came out of the debris field. It was not a warship, though it had the sharp, armored lines of something built to survive close to one. Its hull carried the faded markings of the frontier fleet. Behind it came a battered medical shuttle with one engine glowing an angry orange. The armored ship swung broadside, taking the debris impacts that would have hit the shuttle. Its shields flickered under every strike. Dalton watched a figure moving in the ship's open maintenance bay, tethered to a line and braced against the motion. The figure was tall and lean under a dark command suit. A pale, silver-blue face turned toward the shuttle as its engine coughed again. The figure shoved a power cable into place, signaled someone inside, and barely got clear before the shuttle's engine ignited in a clean burst. Dalton exhaled through his nose. "Well," he said, "that explains the music." The armored ship hailed him. A woman's voice came through, controlled but hard around the edges. "Cargo vessel. Identify yourself." "Wayward. Independent hauler." Reluctant audience for whatever that was. There was a pause. Dalton imagined the woman looking at his ship, the patchwork hull, the old Earth registry, the dented cargo doors. Then she said, "You are inside a restricted debris corridor. You are inside a restricted debris corridor with a dying medical shuttle." I had a reason. So did I. Mine involved not becoming decorative metal. The medical shuttle settled into a safer path. The armored ship came alongside Wayward, close enough for Dalton to see the woman clearly through the glass. Her skin held the soft gray-blue sheen common to people from Erelis. Her dark hair was pulled tight at the base of her neck. A narrow line of gold marked one cheekbone, perhaps a rank sign or an old scar. She still held the tether line that had saved the shuttle. She did not look amused. "Your route was listed as closed," she said. "My route was listed as profitable. I assumed the system meant the second one." For the first time, the corner of her mouth almost moved. "That assumption gets people killed in the Reach. That is why I only make it after breakfast." Before she could answer, a second signal cut across the channel. This one carried the flat tone of a contract relay. Dalton's display filled with an emergency offer. A civilian convoy was approaching from the inner lanes. It needed a pilot who knew the drift belt and could guide it through a damaged transit corridor. The pay was more than he expected for a job that was supposed to take 2 days. He stared at the number. Wayward's left thruster needed work. The sensor array needed work. The cargo lift needed work. Dalton had been putting off all three because money was easier to spend than it was to earn. The woman in the armored ship watched his face. You received the escort request. I did. You know the route. I know the route well enough to dislike it. We need someone who can read it without trusting the map. Dalton leaned back. That sounds almost like a compliment. It was not. Good. I charge extra for those. The convoy emerged from the black behind her ship, and Dalton's humor went quiet. There were 18 civilian vessels in all. Some were small family carriers with paint worn away from their hulls. Some were converted freight shells. One had a medical symbol painted across its side. Another dragged a narrow greenhouse module behind it, lights glowing soft green through the panels. Several were barely larger than cargo containers, tied together by shared power cables. They were a moving town taught to fear every shadow. The woman came back on the channel. Commandé Sera Nahl, Frontier Fleet Escort Division. Former Escort Division? Dalton asked. Her silence lasted exactly long enough to tell him he had guessed something important. Contract pilot Dalton Kade, she said. Will you guide the lifeline convoy through the Kestrel Reach? He looked at the green lights of the greenhouse module, then at the medical shuttle she had saved. 2 days, he said. No shooting at my ship. No military secrets in my cargo bay. And if your convoy has any more dying shuttles, they wait their turn. Sera looked at him through the glass. Accepted. Then I suppose I am employed. He put wayward ahead of the convoy and led them toward the corridor. Behind him, the old beacon kept singing until they were out of range. Dalton set a speed slower than the contract schedule allowed. He moved through the wreckage with small corrections, never using the main engines unless he had to. One by one, the convoy pilots copied his course. A voice came over the shared channel. This is Mara Quill from the medical carrier. Are we behind schedule? Dalton checked the map. We are alive, Doctor. That is currently ahead of schedule. A faint laugh moved through the channel, then disappeared. Sera's ship, vigilant, stayed close to the outside edge of the formation. It had fresh scrapes across its armor from the rescue Dalton had seen. He watched it for a while before he opened a private line. You could have sent a repair crew for that shuttle. I did. You were the repair crew. I was the only one with a suit already sealed. That is a very official answer. It is an accurate one. Dalton adjusted Wayward's nose around a drifting antenna array. You always climb into broken ships yourself? Only when they are full of people. That answer sat with him longer than he expected. Near the end of the second hour, a burst transmission appeared on every screen in the convoy. The suspension notice appeared in flat Frontier Fleet text. Commander Sera Nahl was relieved of duty pending investigation. All civilian vessels were ordered to hold position and await transfer of escort command. Any ship that assisted her flight would be considered in violation of the border accord. Dalton reread the message twice. The shared channel filled with frightened voices as Mara tried to calm people. Sera did not speak for several seconds. Then she opened a convoy-wide channel. The notice is real, she said. Her voice was steady, but Dalton could hear the strain beneath it. I was ordered to abandon the medical shuttle before we reached the debris corridor. I refused. I will answer for that decision when this convoy is safe. A man's voice cut in. Safe according to who? Dalton checked the speaker tag. No name. One of the smaller transports. Sera did not flinch. According to the people whose lives were on that shuttle. The channel went quiet. A new contact appeared on the long-range scanner. 3 Frontier Fleet ships, moving toward them from the inner lanes. Sera opened a private line to Dalton. Their commander is Relon Voss. He will ask you to stand down. Should I? No. That was quick. He believes he is doing the right thing. Does that make him less dangerous? No. Dalton looked at the convoy behind him. 18 ships. Too slow to run. Too valuable to the wrong people. Too frightened to know which order to follow. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. All right, he said. Let's try not to make your bad day worse. Sera's answer came soft enough that he almost missed it. You already have. Dalton did not get a chance to ask what she meant. The 3 ships on the scanner arrived at the edge of visual range, dark wedges against the starfield. They did not deploy weapons. They did not need to. Their presence alone made the smaller civilian vessels tighten their formation until several alarms began complaining about proximity. A new transmission opened. The voice was male, older than Sera's, and exhausted in a way that made Dalton listen more carefully. "Commander Nahl, this is Commander Relon Voss. You're ordered to cut engines and prepare to transfer command." Sera took one breath before answering. "Relon, this convoy is on a live transit schedule. The medical carrier has patients who cannot wait through a detention process. The convoy will be inspected, supplied, and escorted on a secure route." Dalton glanced at his map. The secure route Voss named did not go toward Talaran. It turned inward toward a chain of holding stations controlled by the frontier fleet. "Secure route," Dalton muttered. "That sounds comforting, like a locked door." Voss continued, "Sera, I have read the report. You disobeyed a direct command in a hostile debris field. 2 fleet escorts took damage because you turned back. 2 escorts took damage protecting a medical shuttle with 47 civilians aboard. You did not have authority to decide that risk alone. No one gave them authority to die alone." The silence that followed was different from the earlier frightened silence. It carried history. Dalton checked the convoy feed. Several civilian captains had opened private links with Voss's ships. He could not hear the conversations, but he could see the traffic. Fear was already dividing the formation into invisible pieces. Voss spoke again. "I'm not here to argue the report with you. Stop the convoy. We can sort this out without anyone getting hurt." Dalton sent the route coordinates to Sera. "Those ships are not taking them to Talaran." "I know. They might not know." "I know that too." "Then say it." Sera looked across the gap between vigilant and wayward. Her expression tightened. "If I announce that I do not trust the relief order, some of them will think I am trying to hold them hostage. And if you do not, some of them will think you are hiding something." She gave him a small, unhappy nod. She opened the convoy channel again. "The route Commander Voss has been ordered to use does not continue to Talaran. It takes the convoy to fleet custody. I cannot tell you what happens after that. I can tell you that the supplies on these ships were scheduled for communities that do not have replacements." Mara came in, her voice calm and clear. "The medical carrier has cold storage for 3 days. After that, we begin losing medicines that cannot be remade on Talaran." A different voice said, "What if we go with the fleet? At least they have shields." Dalton had no interest in public speeches, but he had spent too long listening to people make choices with bad information. He keyed his transmitter. "This is Dalton Kade on Wayward. I am the pilot who has to put all of you through the drift belt. The route Voss wants is wide, slow, and easy to patrol. It is also closed at both ends once you enter it. The route we are on is ugly, narrow, and full of old metal that wants to kill you. I cannot tell you which is safer because I do not know who changed your flight plan. But I can tell you the map has been touched." That got their attention. Voss's voice sharpened. "Kade, you are an independent contractor. Do not interfere in a frontier fleet matter." Dalton looked at the convoy lights behind him. "Commander, with respect, I have been paid to interfere in a debris field. This is just a debris field with paperwork." Sera's mouth moved again. This time was definitely almost a smile. Voss said, "You have 10 minutes to comply." The checkpoint ahead answered for them. It appeared first as a pale grid on the scanner, then as a cluster of station modules turning slowly near the mouth of a narrow transit channel. Its docking arms were old, but its signal tower carried fresh frontier fleet codes. A burst of automated traffic filled the convoy network. It demanded inspection, medical quarantine, fuel verification, and separate docking assignments for every vessel. Dalton swore under his breath. The orders sent the medical carrier to one arm, the greenhouse carrier to another, the technical transports to a third. The small family vessels were told to hold far outside the station's shield range. "It is a sorting pattern," he said. Sera was already reading the same thing. "They are isolating the ships with Aegis components. You know what those are?" Her eyes shifted toward him. "I know enough to dislike this." "That is not an answer." "No, it is not." Voss's ships moved closer from behind. The checkpoint opened its docking arms. Dalton saw only one route that kept the convoy together. It was not a route anyone had authorized. A broken service lane cut between a drifting fuel reservoir and the station's outer antenna ring. It was too narrow for a military ship and barely wide enough for Wayward. He sent the course to Sera. She looked at it. That is not a lane. It is if you believe in it. It has a collapsed antenna field on one side and a fuel reservoir on the other. Then we should be polite to both. The station repeated its order. Voss counted down from 10 minutes. Sera looked back toward the convoy. Dalton expected caution. Instead, she said, "Can you get the smallest ships through?" "Yes." "Can you get all of them through?" He considered lying. He did not. "I can get them a chance." Sera made the decision with the speed of someone who had already decided similar things in worse places. All lifeline vessels. Maintain formation behind Wayward. No one docks. Follow Kade's heading exactly. Vigilant will cover the rear. Mara asked, "Commander, are we running from the fleet?" Sera answered, "We are refusing to be separated." Voss's voice came hard over every channel. "Sera, do not do this." She replied once. "Then do not make me." Dalton pushed Wayward forward. The service lane looked narrower in person. The fuel reservoir drifted on one side, round and dull gray, a relic from station expansion that had never been finished. On the other side, the antenna ring turned slowly, broken struts sweeping through space like the ribs of a giant animal. "All ships," Dalton said, "match my roll. If you feel like you have too much room, you are probably doing it wrong." A few nervous sounds came through the channel. Dalton ignored them. He angled Wayward between the first two struts, cut the main engines, and let the ship slide on momentum. The antenna ring passed above him. The fuel reservoir filled the lower half of the cockpit. "Wayward," Sera said, "you are too close to the reservoir." That is a matter of opinion. It is a matter of distance. Distance is also an opinion when you're moving fast enough. He heard her inhale, perhaps to argue, but then a warning came from the rear. One of the family carriers had drifted wide. Its pilot was trying to correct too sharply. The ship's aft edge clipped an antenna strut, spinning it toward the reservoir. Dalton did not think. He fired Wayward's side thrusters, hooked the hauler around, and used his cargo grapples to catch the carrier's outer frame. The impact rattled every loose panel in his ship. "Easy," he said into the shared channel. "Do not fight the spin. Let me borrow you for a second." The pilot on the other ship sounded close to panic. "I cannot hold it." "You do not have to. Count to 5. On 5, use half thrust left. Not full. Half." Dalton watched the carrier's rotation. He timed the motion with the sweep of the antenna ring. At 5, the pilot fired. Dalton released the grapple. The carrier slid clear with inches to spare. The convoy saw it happen. The next ships followed his line more closely. Behind them, Vigilant moved like a dark shield. Sera's ship took a glancing hit from a station defense drone that woke too late to understand what was happening. She did not fire back. She used a burst from her maneuvering thrusters to push the drone into the antenna field, where it tangled and went dark. Voss's ships stopped at the edge of the lane. They were too large to follow without risking the fuel reservoir. Dalton heard Voss call Sera's name once, not as an order this time, but as something closer to a warning. Then the checkpoint vanished behind them. For several minutes, no one spoke. The convoy emerged into open space beyond the station, battered but intact. Dalton eased Wayward back to a safer speed and looked at the system log. The route had been altered before the checkpoint sent its inspection orders. Tiny timing adjustments, fuel requests, docking priorities. Someone had designed the whole sequence so that the convoy would either split itself apart or be forced into the narrow lane he had just used. Sera came to the cockpit of Wayward a short time later. She did not use the link. She crossed from Vigilant in a suit, tethered to a small transfer pod. Dalton met her in the cargo lock because the front cockpit was still full of warning lights, and he did not want her seeing how many of them had been there before today. When the inner door opened, she stepped inside, removed her helmet, and looked around at the cluttered bay. Tools hung from magnetic strips. Spare filters were stacked in mismatched crates. A faded earth coffee maker was bolted to one wall, held together by a metal strap. "This is your command center?" she asked. "This is a perfectly respectable ship." It has a wrench attached to the ceiling. It has excellent balance. Her gaze moved to the engine room door. You could have been killed at the checkpoint. No, but this line of work makes a habit of trying. Sera held his eyes for a moment. In the cargo bay's dim light, the gold mark on her cheek looked less like rank and more like a scar. Then she placed a data chip on the crate between them. This is what I did not tell you, she said. Dalton did not touch it yet. You mean the thing you knew enough about to dislike? The drift belt contains the remains of a defense network called AegisNet. It was built during the Old War to protect evacuation corridors. After the war, parts of it were put under military control. The rest was dismantled, sold, or forgotten. And the convoy is carrying pieces of it. Possibly. The components were repurposed as civilian stabilizers and power regulators. They're old enough that most people do not know where they came from. Why did you know? Because I read the archives no one else wanted to maintain. Dalton picked up the chip. You thought someone was steering us into that net. I thought it was possible. You thought it was possible, and you did not tell the people flying through it. Sera's face went still. I was trying to keep them from panicking. I have heard that sentence before. His voice was harsher than he intended. The old memory rose anyway. A distant command room. A weak rescue signal marked low priority. A decision made by people who did not have to hear the silence afterward. Sera saw something change in him. Dalton, do not. I'm not your old commander. No, you were just making the same argument. For a second, anger flashed in her eyes. Then it faded into something more difficult. You are right, she said. He had expected a defense. Sera looked toward the convoy lights visible through the cargo bay window. I've spent my career being told that command means carrying information other people cannot carry. I thought if I could get them past the next danger, then I could tell them the next truth. But every time I wait, the truth gets more expensive. Dalton looked at the chip in his hand. Then stop waiting, he said. Outside, a warning tone sounded across every ship in the convoy. The medical carrier had lost pressure in one of its treatment bays. Mara's voice came over the channel, tight but controlled. Medical carrier to command. We have a pressure drop in treatment bay 2. 2 patients are stable. 1 technician is inside. We are sealing the compartment. Sera was already moving. Can you isolate the brake? Not yet. The control panel is not responding. Dalton grabbed a tool bag from the wall. What kind of ship? Old civilian conversion, Mara said. The same kind of old conversion you hate. I do not hate them. I just prefer ships that do not surprise me by becoming haunted. Sera looked at him. You are going? The medical carrier is full of narrow vents, bad wiring, and people who know where. Everything is. That makes it almost like home. They crossed in the transfer pod with 2 of Sera's crew. Mara met them in the carrier's central passage, sleeves rolled up, a med kit clipped to her belt. She was shorter than Dalton expected, with dark hair pinned close to her head and the direct expression of someone who had no time for dramatic entrances. The technician is not someone important, she said before Dalton could ask. He is in there. That is enough. Dalton nodded. He liked her immediately. A red light pulsed over the sealed treatment bay. Frost spread along the lower edge of the door. Torrin Dax stood beside an open panel, his long fingers moving through a nest of wires. He was broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed built from calm angles. Unlike Sera, he did not wear a command uniform. His coveralls were marked with grease and patches. The panel reports a leak in 3 places, Torrin said. There is only one. Then the panel is lying, Dalton said. The panel has been persuaded. Torrin handed him a small diagnostic wand. The device blinked over the door seam, then turned toward the overhead air recycler. Dalton followed the signal. Not the hull. Someone cut pressure control from the recycler. Mara's jaw tightened. Sabotage. Sera looked down the corridor. Who had access? Too many people, Mara said. This is a medical carrier. The next minutes moved fast. Torrin crawled into the recycler access while Dalton opened the secondary valve by hand. Sera put on a pressure hood and prepared to enter the treatment bay through an emergency service hatch. Dalton caught her arm. You do not know what is in there. I know someone is running out of air. That is not the same thing. No, she said. It is not. He let go. She disappeared through the hatch. The compartment beyond was nearly dark. Dalton could hear her breathing over the suit channel, steady and controlled. Torrin spoke in short technical phrases. Mara counted the remaining pressure. Dalton kept working the valve, feeling the old mechanism fight him. Then his diagnostic wand flashed again. "Hold," he said. A small black device sat behind the recycler line, hidden under a bundle of original cables. It was not a simple jammer. It had been designed to mimic a mechanical failure for several minutes before triggering a full shutdown. That was not meant to kill the bay right away, Dalton said. It was meant to make them divert. Torrin crawled backward from the access panel. Divert where? Dalton checked the nearest station. The only place close enough for emergency repair was a fuel and service platform called Harrow Stop, a relic positioned at the outer edge of the drift belt. Sera's voice came through the hatch. "I have the technician. He is conscious." "Good," Dalton said. "Tell him he owes us a better day." They got the bay sealed and the technician out. Mara took over with the patients. Torrin brought the device to Wayward's cargo bay, where he and Dalton placed it on a magnetic table and stared at it as if it might explain itself out of embarrassment. It did not. "This was made with commercial parts," Torrin said. "But the programming is military grade." "Transit combined?" Dalton asked. "Maybe. They move more equipment through this region than anyone. But they do not write fleet-level command code alone." Sera stood across from them, arms folded. "Harrow Stop will be expecting us." "Yes," Dalton said. "And the medical carrier cannot go much farther without a full repair." Mara entered behind her. "We stop. I will not gamble with my patients because someone wants us nervous." Sera looked at the sabotage device, then at Mara. "Agreed." Dalton pointed at the empty space above the table. "That means we do not stop like a convoy. We stop like people who know the floor might be wired." Harrow Stop had once serviced mining traffic. Now it looked like a collection of tired metal cylinders tied together by docking tubes. Its lights were on, but only half of them. A faded transit combined emblem sat above the central berth. Dalton did not like it before he saw the place. He disliked it more as Wayward approached. "Too quiet," he said. "Stations are quiet," Sera replied. "Not fuel stations. Fuel stations complain. Someone is always late, someone is always leaking something, and someone is always trying to buy a part they cannot afford." The docking controller answered in a pleasant automated voice. It assigned the medical carrier to the central berth, the technical transports to outer docks, and the rest of the convoy to a holding pattern. Sera refused the outer assignments. The controller repeated itself. Dalton cut in. "We need manual fuel inspection on our ship. Your ship is not scheduled for service." "It is now." "I spilled coffee in the secondary intake." Sera looked at him. "What?" he said. "It is a sensitive system." The controller did not understand humor. That made Dalton trust it even less. Using Wayward's supposed problem as an excuse, he requested access to the station's maintenance board. The automated system granted a limited connection. It was enough. The station's fuel lines had been rerouted. Not all of them. Only the ones leading to the bays assigned to the medical carrier and the technical transports. A delayed pressure imbalance would cause engines to fail after departure. The ships would drift apart in the middle of the drift belt, forced to call for rescue. "Same pattern," Dalton said. "Separate the parts they want." Sera looked at Torrin. "Can they know which ships carry the Aegis modules?" Torrin's expression darkened. "They know enough to look." Mara came onto the channel from the medical carrier. "I have a problem. The station says it cannot release the repair parts until I sign an emergency custody form." "What does the form do?" Sera asked. "It transfers control of the carrier to station authority during the repair." Dalton laughed once without humor. They are not even trying to be subtle anymore. Sera's eyes narrowed. "We leave." "The patients?" Mara asked. Dalton looked at the station map. "There's a way to get the parts without docking." Torrin stared at him. There is always a way. It is usually ugly." He showed them the external service lines that ran from the station's storage pod to the central berth. If he could guide Wayward close enough, Torrin could cut into the feed, pull the needed parts through a cargo tether, and bypass the custody form. "Sera. That is theft." "Borrowing," Dalton said. "We will leave a note." You are joking. I am considering it. The operation began before anyone could object. Wayward slid under the station's central ring with its lights off. Torrin suited up and went out on a tether. Sera joined him because the service line ran past an exposed maintenance rack where someone might be waiting. Dalton stayed in the cockpit, hands on the controls, holding Wayward in a position that made every alarm in the ship complain. Harrow Stop was close enough that its shadow covered the forward windows. The station seemed dead. Then a heat signature moved behind a maintenance panel. "Company," he said. Sera heard him. She swung around the rack, just as two armed figures emerged in work suits. They fired adhesive restraint rounds, not lethal weapons. That was worse in some ways. It meant whoever sent them wanted people alive and manageable. Sera pushed Torrin behind the rack, caught one attacker with a sharp pull on the tether line, and sent him spinning into the station wall. The second tried to cut Torrin's cable. Dalton fired Wayward's maneuvering thruster in a short burst, rocking the whole maintenance rack just enough to throw the attacker off balance. "That was close," Torrin said over the channel. "That is my specialty," Dalton said. Sera crossed the space between them with a compact stun weapon in hand. The fight was quick, hard, and almost silent in the vacuum. She disabled the second attacker, then moved to the access line with Torrin as if nothing had happened. Dalton watched her work. She did not move like someone trying to look brave. She moved like someone who knew fear was useful only if it made you notice what came next. Torrin got the parts. Mara repaired the medical carrier. Before the convoy pulled away, Dalton downloaded the station's transaction records. There were payment requests connected to transit combine accounts. There were also fleet authorization stamps layered beneath them. Someone inside the Frontier Fleet was not merely allowing the operation. Someone was providing it cover. They left Harrow Stop before the station could recover. 3 small pursuit craft came after them, but Sera led them into the outer debris stream and used the station's own defense field to block their path. When the convoy reached safer distance, Torrin opened one of the recovered storage cases. Inside were not only medical components. There were 3 old power regulators, each marked with a faded symbol. A circle crossed by 3 lines. Sera went still. "Aegis Net," she said. Torrin turned one over carefully. These regulators were repurposed decades ago. The convoy has 6 more. Maybe more. Dalton looked at the soft green light of the greenhouse carrier, at the technical ships, at the medical vessel whose patients had almost become an excuse for a forced diversion. "So the convoy is a bag of parts," he said. "A key," Sera corrected. "Not a bag. That sounds worse." "It is." Ilyabrand had been quiet since the checkpoint. Dalton had noticed him on the shared channel a few times, always asking practical questions about supply consumption and next stops. He was a small man with tired eyes, a logistics worker from one of the freight shells. Nothing about him stood out, except that he always seemed to know what was missing before anyone else had counted it. Mara found him in a storage corridor on the technical transport, tried to erase a message relay from a cargo panel. By the time Sera and Dalton arrived, he was sitting on the floor with his hands bound in front of him. Torrin stood by the panel. Mara stood opposite Ilya, angry in the quiet way Dalton had learned to take seriously. "I did not know what they planned," Ilya said before anyone asked. Sera's voice was cold. "You sent them our schedules. I sent cargo timing, docking windows. I did not know about the station. I did not know about Aegis. You knew enough to hide it." Ilya looked down. "My sister is in a labor camp near the inner routes. Transit Combine handles food deliveries there. A broker told me they would move her name to a list if I gave them the convoy schedule. They said no one would be hurt. They said the fleet wanted to inspect some old equipment." Dalton believed that Ilya had told himself those things. He did not know if it made the damage smaller. Sera took one step toward him. "How did they contact you?" Ilya swallowed. "Through Selk Oren." The name landed in the corridor. Torrin looked up from the relay panel. "Selk Oren is not a broker. He is one of the senior route coordinators for the Combine. And he has fleet authorization," Dalton said. Ilya nodded. "He said Commander Nahl would lead the convoy to Merrill Gate. He said the old system would wake when the parts arrived. He said after that there would be an incident, and the Reach would need protection again." "War," Mara said. Ilya did not answer. Sera looked at the dark relay panel. Dalton could see the anger in her, but beneath it was something worse. Recognition. She had been right about the danger, wrong about how much of it she could carry alone. She turned to Mara. Keep him secured. Mara shook her head. Secure him, yes. Humiliate him, no. Everyone on this convoy is watching how we decide who deserves a chance. Sera is fascinétant, Dalton said. He knows the supply routes, the codes, the habits. We need him. Ilya looked up, hope and shame fighting in his expression. Dalton added, that does not mean he is forgiven. No, Sera said. It does not. Outside the transport, the convoy engines brightened one by one. They had no safe station ahead. They had no trustworthy route behind. And somewhere beyond the field of wreckage, Merrill Gate waited with a defense network that had once been built to save civilians and was now being prepared to destroy them. The decision to tell the convoy everything began with a disagreement about who had the right to hear it. Sera wanted to wait until they had cleared the first dense band of the drift belt. Mara wanted a full meeting now. Dalton wanted the truth out before the next disaster made it look like another confession dragged from them. In the end, Sera chose the harder option. She broadcast from Vigilance Bridge with no rank display behind her and no formal escort language in her voice. The crew of Lifeline Convoy gathered around screens in cargo bays, medical rooms, small family cabins, and a makeshift greenhouse where rows of young plants trembled under recycled air. I withheld information, Sera said. That was my decision. It was meant to prevent panic. It did not prevent danger. It gave danger more time. She explained Aegis. Net in plain terms. She explained that parts of the old defense system were scattered through the convoy as civilian hardware. She explained that someone had altered their route to bring those parts to Merrill Gate. She did not say she had a perfect plan because she did not. Then she told them the part no commander liked saying. If we keep moving toward Talaran by the original route, the system could be used against us. If we turn back, the routes behind us are likely compromised. If we surrender, the components can still be taken and used. We have choices. None of them are without risk. The response came fast. A captain from a small water carrier demanded that Sera surrender herself to Voss. A grower from the greenhouse ship said they should scatter rather than stay in a formation that could be targeted. Another voice said the slow ships should be detached because they were the easiest targets and the hardest to protect. For a moment, Dalton heard the same logic that had condemned the medical shuttle. Not cruel people. Frightened people trying to make fear sound like arithmetic. Mara stepped beside Sera on the broadcast. No one on this convoy is a spare part, she said. Not the slow ships. Not the sick people. Not the ones who made mistakes. We may have to give up cargo. We may have to damage ships that cannot be repaired. But we do not begin by deciding who is acceptable to lose. The water carrier captain replied. That is easy to say from a medical ship. Mara did not raise her voice. I've spent 20 years deciding which patient gets the last dose when there is not enough medicine. Do not tell me I say it easily. The channel quieted. Dalton had avoided the broadcast until then. He did not like standing in front of people who wanted certainty from him. He had learned long ago that certainty was often the first thing to get people killed. But he opened his line. Everyone keeps asking whether we should turn around, he said. I checked the route behind us. There are fresh mine signatures near the outer lane. Not enough to block a warship. Enough to break a convoy into pieces. The fleet ships can move through a pattern like that. Your ships cannot. He put the map on their screens. He showed them the station delays, the altered timings, the way each small delay pointed toward the same narrow window near Merrill Gate. You are not choosing between danger and safety, he said. You are choosing whether someone else gets to decide what happens to you. That was not a speech. He did not have a better ending to offer. But it was honest. The convoy meeting ended with no unanimous vote. There could not be one. Some people still wanted to surrender. Some wanted to scatter. A majority agreed to continue toward Merrill Gate under a new plan, provided every ship received the same information and could reject any maneuver that placed it at unreasonable risk. Sera accepted the condition. It cost her something visible. Dalton saw it in the pause before she said, agreed. She had been trained to command by deciding quickly. Now she was agreeing to lead people who had the right to question her decisions. It made the convoy slower. It made every choice harder. It also made the people behind her less likely to break when the next crisis came. That crisis arrived before they had finished reorganizing. Relon Voss's ships appeared at the far end of the next corridor, blocking the cleanest path through the debris. He had brought only 2 escorts this time. Either he had lost support, or he did not want to look like an invasion force. Sera ordered the convoy to hold behind a broken mining platform. Dalton brought Wayward forward with Vigilant. Relon opened a direct channel. "You have made this worse," he said to Sera. "I know," she replied. The answer surprised him. Dalton could hear it in the silence. Relon continued. "Fleet Command has issued a new order. You are to be detained. The convoy is to be secured and inspected under my authority." "Secured where?" "Admiral Gotha." Dalton leaned close to his console. "That is convenient." Relon's eyes moved to him on the split screen. He had a broad face, gray at the temples, and the look of a man who had spent his life sleeping in armor, even when he did not wear it. "Kade," he said, "you are in over your head. That has happened before. Do you understand what you are accusing the fleet of?" Dalton sent him the altered route data and the Harrow stop payment records. "I'm accusing someone of turning 18 civilian ships into a very expensive trap." Relon studied the files. His expression did not change, but his hand tightened once on the arm of his chair. Sera said, "Check the original route authorization, not the final copy. The first one. Look for a maintenance marker inside the logistics layer." "You expect me to break a SEAL command archive? I expect you to decide whether you care more about a SEAL or about the people behind me." Relon looked at the convoy in the distance. He looked back at Sera. "You were always very sure you were the only one willing to make that decision," he said. Sera took the hit without flinching. "I was wrong about that." The words mattered. Dalton knew it. So did Relon. The channel closed. For 9 minutes, nothing moved. The convoy waited behind the mining platform, engines low, every civilian pilot wondering whether a fleet gunship would fire. Dalton kept his eyes on the scanner. "You trust him?" "No," Sera said. "I trust that he hates being lied to." "That is almost the same thing." "It is not." A reply came from Relon. He did not speak first. He transmitted an image of the original route authorization. Buried in the logistics code was a maintenance marker that did not belong. The marker had been inserted before Sera's rescue of the medical shuttle, before her suspension, before the official story had started. Relon's face returned to the screen. It looked older now. "Selk Oren's office has access to this layer through transit combine agreements," he said. "But someone in Fleet Command approved the seal." "Can you identify them?" Sera asked. "Not yet." "Then do not take us to Merrill Gate under their orders." Relon stared at her for a long moment. "You're still going there." "We have to. That station is a choke point. So is every road that matters." Relon almost smiled, but did not reach his eyes. "You always did like lines like that. I learned from you." The connection ended again. This time his ships moved aside. Not far, not enough to declare support, but enough to leave the corridor open. The convoy passed through. Dalton did not speak until Relon was behind them. "You two have history." "Everyone at the edge has history," Sera said. That was not an answer either. "No." He looked over at her. "You're very good at those." "At what?" "Giving answers that are technically true and useless at the same time." She met his gaze, and the tiredness in her face softened for a second. "You are very good at asking questions that are rude in a useful way." Another professional skill. They traveled deeper into the drift belt. The debris grew denser. Old warships floated in the darkness, their hulls opened by impacts or age. Some still carried dim emergency lights. Some had been stripped for parts until only frames remained. Wayward's damaged sensors flickered every few minutes. Dalton had to rely more and more on visual readings, old star positions, and instinct. He hated that. Instinct was useful, but it did not replace information. Sera noticed him rubbing his left wrist after every sharp maneuver. "You are injured," she said. "I am annoyed. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes they are close relatives." "Show me." He looked at her. "Commander, are you giving me a medical order?" "I am asking." The distinction caught him. He unsealed the sleeve of his flight jacket. A bruise had spread across his wrist where the cargo grapple controls had kicked back during the rescue at the checkpoint. It was not serious. It was also not nothing. Sera took a small medical strip from her belt and pressed it against the skin. Her fingers were cool, steady. Dalton watched her face rather than the strip. "You do not need to do that," he said. "I know. Then why?" She looked up. "Because I choose to." The answer landed harder than it should have. They were alone in the cockpit. The convoy lights were distant behind them. The air recycler hummed. Somewhere below, Wayward's left thruster made a sound like an old animal resenting being asked to work. Dalton tried to make a joke. Nothing came. Sera finished sealing the strip and let her hand rest against his wrist for 1 second longer than necessary. Then she pulled back. "I read your service record." After the checkpoint, she said, "That seems unfair. I have not read yours. You know more than enough from the news notices. I know you do not like leaving people behind." Her expression changed. He did not press. Instead, he said, "The signal I ignored was from civilian transport. Command called it unreliable. We were told there were hostile ships in the area. We were told we had to protect the bigger mission." "What was the bigger mission?" Dalton looked out at the wreckage. "A survey run. We were mapping a new military lane. Very important lines on a very important screen." Sera did not offer easy comfort. "I followed the order," he continued. 3 days later, another ship found the transport. The people on it were gone. The official report said conditions were uncertain and no pilot could have changed the outcome. Maybe that was true. It did not make the silence easier. Sera leaned against the console beside him. "When I was younger, I believed the worst thing a commander could do was hesitate. Then I learned the worst thing is becoming so proud of your decisions that you stop seeing who has to live with them." "That happened to you?" "I thought I could carry every fear for the people under my command. I thought if I hid uncertainty, they would feel safe. But people always know when you are afraid. They just do not know why." Dalton looked at her. "You told them today. Too late, perhaps." "Not too late. You cannot know that." "No." He smiled a little. "But I can be annoying in a useful way, remember?" This time she smiled openly. The moment did not turn into a kiss. Dalton was grateful for that. It would have felt like trying to escape the whole universe in one small gesture. Instead, Sera picked up a loose bolt from the console and held it out to him. "Your ship is shedding pieces." "That is not a bolt. That is a morale indicator. It is on the floor. It is monitoring the floor." She set it down carefully. "I am beginning to understand why this ship needs so much repair. Wayward and I have an agreement. I do not criticize her wiring. She does not criticize my life choices." The shared channel interrupted them. Torrin had found something in the recovered Aegis regulators. The old network still contained a dormant civilian protocol. It had been designed before military command had taken control. If activated at Merrill Gate, it could reassign the system from attack response to corridor protection. It would scan for mines, clear false navigation locks, and prioritize unarmed civilian traffic. There was a problem. The protocol required more than the physical modules. It required direct access to Merrill Gate's core and independent consent from the civilian ships connected to it. The designers had built the safeguard to stop a military government from pretending to act for refugees without their approval. Dalton liked the dead engineers who had thought of that. Sera stared at Torrin's data. "Can we do it?" Torrin's answer was careful. "We could try. The core may be damaged. The old interfaces may reject modern systems. And Selk will be there before us if he has any sense." "He has sense," Ilya said from the guarded transport compartment. "Too much of it. He will assume you will choose the only move that keeps the convoy together. Then we will have to arrive with something he does not expect," Dalton said. Mara looked at him. "Do you have one of your ugly plans?" "I have the beginning of one." Sera turned to him. "We are not running for Talaran anymore." "No," Dalton said. "We are running for the thing someone wants to use against us." Sera took a breath. The decision was hers, but not hers alone now. She opened the convoy channel and explained what Torrin had found. She asked for agreement, not obedience. One by one, the ships answered. The medical carrier first, then the greenhouse ship, then the water carrier that had demanded surrender. then the small family vessels, voices shaking but clear. The lifeline convoy turned toward Gate. The plan Dalton built did not look like a plan when he first showed it to the convoy. It looked like a mess of colored lines drawn through a debris field that every sane pilot had spent years avoiding. Gate lay beyond the deepest section of the drift belt. The direct route was broad enough for a fleet cruiser, which meant it was broad enough for Selk or to watch. Dalton's route cut through the remains of an old salvage zone where broken cargo rings, shattered engines, and sections of abandoned warships had been pulled together by a weak gravity tide. That is not a route, Mara said, studying the map. People keep saying that, Dalton replied. I feel it lacks imagination. Torin leaned closer to the display. The debris is moving, slowly, at different speeds. That is what makes it exciting. Sera folded her arms. Explain the part where no one dies of excitement. Dalton tapped the map. The convoy splits into 3 groups. The empty cargo shells and any ship that can travel light become decoys. We put signal repeaters in them, make them look like the Aegis modules are headed down the direct route. Selk sees a big, easy target and sends his people after them. And the real modules? Sera asked. Technical ships with Torin. They move through this channel with Wayward. It is too narrow for anything larger than a cargo hauler. The civilian carriers stay behind the gravity tide with Vigilant, Mara, and the rest of the escort. Slow, dark, and hard to see. Mara looked unhappy. We are splitting the convoy. We are separating jobs, not people. Each group stays close enough to call for help. And no ship moves alone. Sera studied him. The decoys are still going to be targeted. Yes. Who flies them? Volunteers. No. Dalton turned from the display. Suha. No. I will not ask civilians to put themselves in front of weapons. You will ask civilians to fly through a graveyard of warships with failing engines. We are past the point where every job is safe. Her face hardened. That does not make it right. No. It makes it necessary to be honest about what it costs. The argument spread through the planning room. Torin pointed out that the decoy ships could be mostly automated, but not entirely. Their systems were too old. Mara said no one should be pressured. Ilya offered to go on one of the decoys, then stopped when everyone looked at him. I know how the Combine tracked cargo traffic, he said. I can make the signatures believable. Sera looked at him for a long time. You are still under guard. I know. You are not buying forgiveness. I know that too. Dalton watched her consider it. She did not make the decision alone. She asked Mara and Torin. She asked the civilian captains. The discussion took time. It was messy. It was the exact kind of process old Sera would have considered dangerous in a crisis. At the end, 3 pilots volunteered for the decoys. One was the captain of the water carrier who had argued for surrender. Another had flown supply routes for years and knew how to fake a cargo signature. The third was Ilya, under the watch of a security officer for Vigilant. Sera did not thank them for being brave. She told them what the danger was, what support they would have, and what signal would call the plan off. Dalton respected her for that. Before the split, Dalton held a training session for the civilian pilots in Wayward's cramped cargo bay. The old hauler's projector showed a rotating simulation of the salvage zone. The pilots sat on tool crates and cargo cases, listening with the grim focus of people who knew the lesson might keep them alive. First rule, Dalton said, do not chase my ship. A pilot raised a hand. You said we had to follow your route. Follow the route. Do not chase me. Wayward is smaller and has worse judgment. A few people laughed. Second rule, if I say cut power, cut power. Do not ask why. Do not argue. You can complain later, and I will probably deserve it. He ran them through the turn markers, the drift timings, the way the gravity tide would pull a ship sideways if it entered too fast. He did not use complicated terms when a simple one would do. He repeated the dangerous points until even the least experienced pilot could tell him what to do if a rotating hull blocked the path. Sera watched from the doorway. Dalton pretended not to notice until the training ended. You're good at this, she said. I've had a lot of chances to explain bad ideas to people. You make them believe they can do it. They can. That is why I keep telling them. She stepped closer. You do not talk like someone who believes he should lead. I did not want to lead. You are doing it anyway. Only through places with very specific hazards. Please do not make that into a job title. Sera expression sauvetage. I will try. They stood too close in the quiet cargo bay. Dalton could hear the convoy preparing outside, the low thrum of engines and docking clamps. Sera reached up and touched the repaired edge of his flight jacket, where a patch of new fabric covered old damage. You always make a joke when you think something will hurt, she said. Not always. No. Sometimes I complain. She laughed, low and brief. Dalton had begun to recognize that sound. It was not common. It made him want to earn it again. He lifted a hand, but stopped before touching her. Sera. Her eyes met his. This is not a very good time. No, she said. It may be the worst possible time. That has not stopped you from speaking before. He smiled. You are learning my habits. I'm trying to determine which ones are survivable. Then she took his hand and placed it against the side of her face, over the gold mark on her cheek. Her skin was smooth and cool under his palm. The kiss was brief at first, almost careful. It was not a reward for rescue or a promise that nothing would happen to them. It was an admission that they had both seen the other clearly enough to stop pretending it did not matter. When they drew apart, Sera rested her forehead against his for a moment. Come back, she said. Dalton wanted to tell her he would. Instead, he chose the truth he could keep. I will do everything I can. She nodded. So will I. The convoy split 2 hours later. The decoy group emerged into the open lane, bright with false engine signatures and simulated cargo pings. Ilya sat in the lead shell, feeding transit combined patterns into the repeater network while the security officer watched every movement he made. The real technical group followed Dalton into the salvage zone. Wayward slipped between the first torn hulls with its exterior lights off. Torrens' 2 technical transports followed close behind, carrying the Aegis regulators and the relay equipment needed at Merrill Gate. The channel was so tight that Dalton could see scratches in the metal around him from ships that had not made it through. Remember, he told the pilots. Small corrections. The wreckage is not angry at you. It is simply waiting for you to make a mistake. One of the technical pilots said, that is not comforting. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be accurate. The first section went well. The second did not. A dead cruiser hull began to rotate faster than Dalton's timing model predicted. The gravity tide had caught it differently. Its broken wings swung across the channel, cutting off the route behind Wayward. Hold position, Dalton said. Torrens' transport drifted too close to the wing. The pilot fired reverse thrust, but the ship began to slide sideways toward a field of jagged plating. Dalton spun Wayward around and used the cargo grapples again. The damaged sensors made the movement nearly blind. He caught the transport's outer rail and pulled it just enough to change its angle. Dalton, Torrens said, your left thruster is overheating. I know. The warning is severe. It is emotionally expressive. That is not a correction. A metallic shriek ran through Wayward. The left thruster cut out for half a second. Dalton felt the ship dip toward the cruiser hull. Sera's voice came through from the civilian group, delayed but clear. Wayward, report. Busy, report. Dalton forced the ship into a roll, released Torrens' transport, and fired a short burst from the right maneuvering thruster. Wayward cleared the wing by a breath. Still decorative metal free, he said. There was a pause. Then Sera said, do not do that again. I will add it to the list. They made it through. Behind them, the decoy group reported pursuit. Selk had taken the bait. 4 armed craft and 2 fleet escorts were moving after the false signatures. Relland's ships were positioned between the decoys and the civilian group. For several tense minutes, no one knew which way he would move. Then a fleet-wide order arrived. It carried command authority above Relland's level. The order instructed him to engage the decoys immediately and classify all lifeline vessels as hostile assets under the border accord. Mara heard it. Dalton heard it. Every ship heard it. Relland did not answer. The decoy group sent a new message. One of the false cargo shells had been hit. Its pilot was alive, but the ship was drifting. Ilya's shell was still functioning, and he was directing the damaged decoy toward a safe path. Sera opened a line to Relland. Do not let them kill people to hide a lie. Rellen's voice came back low. If I refuse, they will strip my command and send someone else. If you comply, you will be the someone else. For a long second, there was only static. Then Relon ordered his ships to form a shield wall between the attackers and the decoys. A portion of the frontier fleet broke from his command at once. 2 escorts turned toward him, weapons hot. The rest followed Rellen's line. Dalton saw the exchange only as symbols on a damaged display. He could not help. He was trapped inside the salvage zone with Torrens transports and a failing ship. But he understood what Relon had done. The man had not become Sera's ally because of a speech. He had reached the point where following orders required him to deny what he could see. The convoy had one more chance. Marrowgate came into view at the far end of the debris field. It was enormous, built around the shattered ring of an old jump corridor. Its central station had once been elegant. Now, it was scarred, missing whole sections of outer plating. Around it, old defense pylons floated dormant in the darkness. Dalton felt a cold line move down his back. Aegisnet was already waking. Lights traveled across the pylons one by one, pale and distant. The station began sending automatic challenges to every ship in range. It demanded identity, authority, and purpose. The decoy group was still under fire. The civilian group was hiding behind wreckage. Torrens transports carried the pieces needed to change the system. And Wayward's left thruster was close to failing completely. Sera's voice came through the channel. Calm. Clear. All groups, proceed to final positions. No one breaks formation without calling it. We finish this together. Dalton looked at Marrowgate. That, he said quietly, is going to be another bad day. Marrowgate did not fire at them immediately. That was the most frightening part. The defense pylons turned slowly around the station, their old surfaces waking in strips of pale light. Automated voices spoke through every channel in languages Dalton did not know, then settled on simple trade English. Enregistré civilian formation. Maintain distance. Submit command authority. The words sounded almost polite. Dalton checked the response pattern. It is waiting for a military key. Torrens' voice came from the technical transport behind him. The civilian protocol is buried beneath the military layer. We need access to the core before it decides we are a threat. Sera was already moving vigilant toward the station's damaged service arm. Mara, move the civilian group behind the outer wreckage, then come inside with us. Keep their consent channel open from the core. Torren, you are with us. Dalton, stay outside with Wayward and the technical transports. Use Torren's guidance to fit the regulators to the exterior conduits. Dalton looked at Wayward's engine readings. My ship is not going anywhere near that station without a strong apology. You're the only pilot who can place the regulators through the interference. I was afraid you would say something reasonable. Sera's voice dropped on the private channel. You do not have to do this. He looked at the station, at the convoy lights scattered in the dark. Yes, he said. Edo. Mara moved the civilian ships behind the outer wreckage and left their captains holding the formation. Then Vigilant latched onto the broken service arm. Sera, Mara, Torren, and 2 of Vigilant's security crew crossed into the station through a manual airlock, while Dalton remained outside with Wayward and the technical transports. The plan was simple enough to explain and hard enough to survive. Guided by Torren's readings from the core, Dalton and the technical transports would place and connect the old Aegis regulators along Marrowgate's exterior power conduits. Inside the station, Torren would reach the original civilian interface. Mara would receive and coordinate the consent signals from the civilian ships through the core, while Sera kept Selk's people from locking them out. Wayward would hold position inside the interference field as the relay between the scattered regulators. It required every part to work at once. That was when plans usually went wrong. Inside the station, Sera's team found the first signs that Selk had been there for some time. Doors had been forced open with clean cuts. The old civilian markings on the walls had been covered with fresh military command panels. A line of portable generators fed power toward the core. Torren touched a dark stain of grease on one conduit. They're using modern equipment to force old systems awake. Mara checked her scanner. Can they fire the network? Not yet, Torrance said, but they can make it think someone else did. Sera led them through a long corridor where gravity came and went in slow pulses. Every few steps, loose tools lifted from the floor and drifted toward the ceiling. The security crew moved ahead, checking corners. A voice came over the station speakers. Commander Nahl. Selk Oren sounded calm. You have caused extraordinary damage to the stability of this region. Sera kept walking. You built a trap for civilian ships. I built a response to a border that has become undefended. You needed bodies to justify it. I needed proof that peace had become a weakness. Mara looked at the nearest speaker with open disgust. Selk continued. You were always predictable. You mistake mercy for strategy. You would never abandon the convoy. That made it useful. Sera stopped beneath a flickering light. No, she said. You mistook mercy for something you could exploit. That was your mistake. The speakers went silent. Outside, Dalton maneuvered wayward into the position Torrin had marked from a core. The interference field hit the ship like rough water. Screens blinked, and the damaged sensor array filled with snow. Wayward to technical group, he said. Bring the first regulator in. The nearest technical transport eased forward. A robotic arm extended from its cargo bay, carrying the old regulator toward Wayward. Dalton caught its guide frame with the cargo grapples, then used Torrens coordinates to ease it into the first exterior power conduit. Wayward's rear coupling locked the relay cable that linked it to the other modules. One connected, Torrens said from inside the station. The first pylon brightened. A warning flashed across Dalton's console. The relay current was higher than predicted. He adjusted the stabilizers, and Wayward's left thruster protested with a grinding roar. Please do not choose today to become a sculpture, he told the ship. Dalton repeated the process with the second regulator, then the third. At the edge of the system, Selk's armed craft broke away from the fight with Relon and rushed toward Marrowgate. Relon's remaining ships tried to stop them. Bright bursts of defensive fire flashed across the darkness, not large enough to blind the stars, but close enough that Dalton felt each one as a countdown. From the core chamber, Mara opened the consent channel she had kept linked to the civilian captains. The civilian ships began transmitting their signals. One by one, the ships acknowledged their role in the protocol. The medical carrier, the greenhouse carrier, the water carrier, the technical transports, and the family vessels. AegisNet rejected the first sequence. Why? Mara asked over the channel. Torrin answered from beneath the main control bank. The core is receiving military override commands. Selk is locking the old protocol behind his authority. Sera's voice cut through. We are at the core. He is here. Dalton heard a sharp impact, followed by the crackle of a weapon discharge. He could not see what had happened, but his hands tightened on the controls. Status? He asked. Working, Sera said. That was all she gave him. Inside the core chamber, Selk stood on a raised control platform, surrounded by the portable generators. He wore no armor, only a formal transit coat with a command band at one wrist. He had the composed expression of someone who expected other people to make the difficult choices for him. Two armed guards held the upper walkways. The security crew exchanged fire with them from behind a bulkhead. Mara moved toward a side console. Torrin crawled under the main control bank, trying to reach the original civilian interface. Selk looked at Sera across the chamber. Look at what you have done, he said. The fleet is fighting itself. Civilian ships are in a war zone, all because you could not accept that some losses are necessary. Sera kept her weapon trained on him. You did not choose losses. You chose people who could not fight back. That is what power is. Choosing what survives. No, she said. That is what fear calls itself when it wants to sound important. Selk moved one hand toward the controls. Sera fired at the panel beside him. Sparks burst across the platform. He stepped back, and one of the guards dropped from the upper rail toward her position. Mara warned her. Sera turned, caught the guard's arm, and used the low gravity to redirect him into the wall rather than shoot him. The guard lost his weapon. Sera kicked it away and moved forward. Selk reached the emergency command line. Torrin shouted, "Do not let him touch the red switch." Dalton heard that through the station channel and almost laughed from the strain. Of course, the old system had a red switch, and Cell pressed it. Every pylon around Merrill Gate flared bright. Aegisnet sent a new message across the convoy. Hostile formation detected. Dalton's display marked the civilian group in red. Mara's voice went tight. It has us. Not for long, Torrance said. Outside, Wayward's relays surged. The cockpit lights dimmed. Dalton felt the current through the floor. Dalton, Torrance said, we need another 30 seconds of stable power. He looked at the heat warning on the left thruster. I can give you 15. Then find 15 more. That is a very engineer answer. The first defense pylon turned toward the civilian group. Rellen's voice burst onto the channel. Kade, I can block the firing line. You cannot block all of them. No, but I can buy time. His ships moved between the pylons and the convoy, shields flaring under the system's targeting beams. He had chosen. There was no room left for uncertainty. Dalton pushed Wayward closer to the core of the interference field. The left thruster failed. The ship yawned hard. Warning lights turned red. One regulator coupling tore loose, and the power reading dropped. Dalton caught the ship with manual controls. He had no left thrust, only the damaged right side and a small emergency maneuvering. Bank. He could pull away. He could save Wayward. The protocol would fail, the pylons would fire, and every choice after that would be made by people with weapons. He looked at the green markers of the civilian ships. Then he locked the controls into a slow counterspin and used Wayward's cargo grapple to catch a broken section of Merrill Gate's outer ring. The ship slammed against the tension line. The impact threw him forward against the harness. Pain flashed through his shoulder, but the relay stabilized. 30 seconds, Torrance said. Now we have 30. Inside the core, Sera saw the same data. Wayward was pinned against the outer ring, its hull taking the strain that should have gone through the system. She could finish the protocol, or she could try to pull him free. Selk smiled when he saw her hesitate. This is what command costs, he said. You know that. Sera looked at the civilian protocol interface beneath Torrance's hands. It required one final command decision. The old system had been designed to ask whether civilians were to be protected even when military assets were at risk. She had spent her whole career answering questions like that alone. This time, she did not. Mara, Sera said, open a fleet channel. From the core console, Mara understood at once. She patched in Rellen's ships, the civilian captains, and every escort still listening. Sera's voice crossed the station, the convoy, and the battlefield outside. Wayward is holding the relay. The civilian protocol can protect the convoy, but only if we create a power bridge. I'm ordering no one to do it. I'm asking for volunteers who understand the risk. There was no long silence. The greenhouse carrier answered first. Its pilot said they could spare reserve power for 2 minutes. The water carrier answered next. Then the medical carrier. Then Relon, his ship's shields already burning bright. Frontier fleet vessel under my command will join the bridge. One by one, the ships connected their power feeds through the old network. Not because Sera had hidden the risk. Not because Dalton had sacrificed himself alone. Because they had been told the truth and chose together. The current surged. Through Aegisnet, Wayward's grip on the outer ring loosened. The ship began to drift, dead in space. Protocol accepted, the station said. The red targeting marks vanished from Dalton's screen. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the pylons changed direction. Instead of turning their weapons toward the civilian ships, they sent wide scanning beams through the drift belt. Mines hidden in the debris lit up on the display. False navigation locks released. The attacking craft near Merrill Gate found their engines disabled by precise pulses that did not harm their crews. A corridor opened through the wreckage. Aegisnet spoke again. Civilian passage priority confirmed. Selk tried to run. He seized a maintenance rail and pushed toward an emergency shuttle bay. Sera caught him before he reached the door. He fought only long enough to prove he had never expected to be touched by the consequences of his plan. Rellen's security crew entered the core moments later. Relon himself was still on his ship, holding the outer line, but his people took Selk into custody. The evidence was already inside the system. The old network had recorded every override command, every false authorization, and every effort to turn civilian ships into targets. The records existed in the same machinery Selk had tried to weaponize. Dalton woke to Mara leaning over him in Wayward's cockpit. "Do not move your shoulder," she said. "That is a lot to ask from a ship that keeps falling apart. Your ship is not speaking. It has strong opinions." Mara checked the seal around his shoulder and gave him a look that said she knew exactly how much pain he was hiding. "Sera is alive," she said before he could ask. He closed his eyes for one breath. "And the convoy? Alive. The corridor is open." Dalton looked through the cracked forward glass. Ahead of Wayward, the dark debris field had become a path of pale guide lights. Mines drifted harmlessly away from the lane. Wreckage shifted under controlled pulses, making space where there had been none. It was the closest thing the Kestrel Reach had ever had to beauty. Sera entered the cockpit a few minutes later. Her uniform was torn at one sleeve. There was a smear of grease across her cheek, and her eyes were brighter than he had ever seen them. She stopped beside his seat. "You look terrible," Dalton said. "You are in no position to judge. I'm a professional." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sera reached down and took his hand. "You did not tell me the relay would trap you," she said. "I did not know it would. I had a strong suspicion. That is not better. I know." She looked at him with anger, relief, and something warm enough to make him forget the pain in his shoulder. "I asked you to come back." "I did. You barely did. Still counts." Sera leaned down and kissed him, slower this time. Not a promise that the hard things were finished. A promise that neither of them would pretend the other did not matter. Weeks later, Lifeline Convoy reached Talaran. The settlement was smaller than Dalton expected. Low domes sat beneath a hard orange sky. Wind carried dust across the landing field. People came out to meet the convoy before the engines had fully cooled. They moved quickly toward the medical supplies, water systems, seed modules, and repair equipment that would keep them alive. Dalton watched from the ramp of Wayward with his shoulder strapped and his left thruster still waiting for parts. Mara supervised the medical unload. Torin argued happily with 3 local mechanics over how many regulators could be reused. Ilya stood apart at first, uncertain what he was allowed to do. Then Mara handed him a manifest and told him the water filters needed to be counted twice. It was work, not forgiveness. Relon arrived 2 days later with a small escort and an official report. The report did not make everyone happy. It did not erase the damage done by the Frontier Fleet or the Transit Combine, but it carried the Aegis records, Selk's commands, and the names of the officials who had helped hide them. Relon found Sera near the landing field, where she was looking at the first civilian ships preparing to use the new corridor. "They offered you your command back," he said. "They offer me a different command." And Sera looked toward the ships. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life asking. Permission to protect the people I was assigned to protect." Relon nodded slowly. "Then what will you do? Build an escort service that does not need that kind of permission." He looked at her, then at Dalton repairing a panel on Wayward. "With him, sera expression warmed. With everyone who chooses it." The new escort service did not begin as a grand institution. It began with a schedule, a handful of repaired ships, civilian captains who knew every dangerous corner of the Reach, and rules written so no commander could quietly decide that someone was not worth saving. Sera accepted leadership, but not ownership. Mara helped create medical protocols. Torin designed maintenance checks for the old Aegis corridor. Relon assigned a small number of fleet volunteers who had seen enough to understand why the new service mattered. Ilya worked the supply lists under supervision, sending requests for information about his sister through every legal channel they could find. Dalton spent most of his time arguing with Wayward's engines. On the day of the first official civilian escort run, he stood in the cockpit while the new convoy formed beyond Talaran's thin upper atmosphere. Wayward still had mismatched panels. Its left thruster still made a noise that could be described kindly only as determined. But the ship was flying. Vigilant took position beside him. Sera's voice came through the private channel. "Kade, hold formation." Dalton looked at the clean corridor ahead, marked by Aegis lights. Behind them, ships carrying food, tools, and passengers waited for his heading. "I always hold formation," he said. "You have never held formation. I hold it creatively. That is not a recognized method. It should be." He heard her laugh. Then her tone became steady and official, but not distant. "All civilian vessels, prepare for departure. The corridor is open." Wayward moved first. Vigilant matched its speed. Together, they led the convoy into the Kestrel Reach, not to escape it, and not because anyone had ordered them into danger. They flew because a road that had once been built to abandon people had become a road that could carry them home.